Hello, everyone. For weeks 11 and 12, we'll be covering solution-focused family therapy. So this will be your lecture for both weeks 11 and 12. So I'll start off here with a little quote from DeShazer, Steve DeShazer, one of the creators of solution-focused therapy. One of the most important aspects of solution-focused brief therapy is the general tenor and stance that is taken by the therapist. The overall attitude is positive, respectful, and hopeful. There is a general assumption that people have within them strong resiliencies and can utilize these to make changes. Further, there is a core belief that most people have the strength, wisdom, and experiences to affect change. So, really, here, similarly to collaborative language systems, solution focused brief therapy is about uh, the posture that you have within the relationship within the room, and there is a deep belief that the client is inherently capable, that they have the answers, they have the solutions, they are in need of a space to explore them, uncover them, brainstorm them, things like that. So some important notes: rather than being solution givers, which I think is a misunderstanding of solution focused, solution based therapists collaborate with the client to envision potential solutions based on the client's experience and values. So, from my vantage point, I think maybe a more apt name for this approach would be solution building. So it's a less obvious part of this process in that it is that in session, therapists ask questions and offer observations that shift how clients think about their solution situation so that they move from a problem focus to a perspective that emphasizes resources, strengths, abilities, possibilities, and the future. So maybe here you can see a little bit of overlap with narrative where you come from, you start at a problem saturated narrative and then you're really looking at exceptions. So here you have this kind of problem focus, and then the goal is to be solution focused. So as this approach is goal focused and emphasizes measurable change, it tends to be brief, 8 to 12 sessions, making it a favorite approach in managed care environments, schools, and other time limited contexts. So here's a little joke for solution focused. Joe has been seeing a psychologist for 3 years because of his fears that there are monsters under his bed and he can't get a good night's sleep. Since his symptoms haven't gone away, he stops seeing the psychologist and decides to try something different. A week later, Joe's former psychologist runs into him at Ralph's and is surprised to find him looking well, rested, energetic, and cheerful. Doc, Joe says, it's amazing. I'm cured. That's great news, the psychologist replied. You seem to be doing much better. How? I went to see a therapist, Joe said enthusiastically, and she cured me in just one session. One? That's crazy. How did she do that? The psychologist asked incredulously. Oh, easy, said Joe. She's a solution focused brief therapist, and she told me to cut the legs off my bed. All right. So the creators of solution focused brief therapy are Steve DeShazer and Insoo Kim Berg. They are a couple. And uh, Steve was born and raised in Milwaukee. Insoo was born and raised in Korea. Steve is a classically trained musician. He had a bachelor in fine arts. He spent time at MRI in Palo Alto. So if you remember MRI and Milan, sorry, lost me for a sec, from Theories 1. Steve trained under those individuals. Insoo was also studied and worked at MRI and had the same mentor as Steve, who is John Weakland. They met at MRI and they got married, and they both passed away in the early 2000s. So some quotes from them. Steve says, problem talk creates problems. Solution talk creates solutions. Then Insoo said, that's a way to see it. And there is also another way to see it. That would be something that would be used if someone were to say, this is what's going on. She may say something like that. That's one way to see it. What's another way to see it? Um, so clearly from the last slide here, solution-focused brief therapy on like the genogram of family therapy approaches. There would be a direct line into solution focused from MRI. So Stephen and Sue both studied under John Weakland, who was influenced by Milton Erickson and Eve Lipchick. All right, some fundamental beliefs from a solution-focused perspective. If something is not broken, do not fix it. It doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be discussed. It doesn't need to be explored. If it's working, leave it alone. If something is not working, do something different. If something works, do more of it. So work with family, emphasize what they are when you are doing work with families. This typo here. Maybe it would say work with the family does emphasize what they are doing that works and getting them to do more of it. Resistance is not a useful concept. I'll talk about that in the next slide. This implies that the client does not want to change, and the belief is that clients are interested in changing. That's why they're there, and they have capacity to change. Most clients already possess the resources they need in order to change. Most people solve their problems without help. Most people are not in therapy. This approach assumes people are resilient and resourceful. Problems are not seen as an evidence of failure, just a part of life. Problems are seen as a normal life cycle complication. Beliefs that people can get better just by changing the way they talk about their problems. So very similar to CLS and narrative. Solution-focused therapists very much believe in the power of language, and getting clients to talk positively will help them think positively, ultimately act positively, and solve their problems. All right, so the concept of resistance. Let's talk about this a little bit more. So Dr. DeShazer did not believe in the concept of resistance. An example, a client who does not do the homework assignment does not show resistance. Rather, this is their way of cooperating and telling the therapist that the homework is not in accordance with how they do things. So with resistance, we do not blame the client if something is not working. We're seeing their feedback, or we're seeing their actions, the relationship with the homework and stuff like that, as cooperation, as feedback to inform the process. So the belief here is that the client is the expert. And another quote here, resistance implies that the client does not want to change and the therapist is separate from the client's system they are treating. You want to approach each new case from a position of cooperation rather than focusing on resistance, power, and control. So the client defines the goal of treatment. Let's look at this quote or this example on the other side. You invite me to have dinner at your house and you serve me broccoli. I tell you honestly that I do not like broccoli, but you have no idea what vegetable or other food I like. So when you invite me the second time and serve another vegetable that you think I will like, it is possible that I will not like that vegetable. I wonder if in that case you would invite me to dinner and you might think she just doesn't like anything. So had you asked me the first time directly, what vegetable do you like? I would have been able to tell you and our relationship would not have suffered. So similar to homework, if I create homework for a client, they don't do it, I'll create maybe other homework. And if I don't ask for their feedback, if I don't talk about barriers, interest, value, relevance, things like that, and they don't do the homework again, I might go, oh, this is a client who's not interested in homework. But it's because I haven't taken the time to understand that client more fully for me to have resistance like not be the conclusion. All right. Let's talk about the 7 main principles in solution-focused therapy. These principles focus on how clients deal with problems, how they are maintained, and how to solve them or dissolve them. First principle is that most complaints develop in relationships. Solutions are developed by changing interactions and considering the limitations of the situation. So you can very clearly see MRI here, very focused on interactions. The second principle is that the goal of solution-focused brief therapy is to help clients do something different by changing their interactive behavior so that a solution can be achieved. Sorry about that. The third principle dictates the importance of establishing a cooperative relationship with the client, ergo, not seeing them as resistant or needing to be convinced that they are a partner in this process, and the feedback that all things that they are providing you are feedback to impart into the process and to implement. So the fourth principle states that a new and beneficial meaning can be constructed from a client's complaint. This principle reflects the positive orientation that solution-focused therapy holds. So creating different meaning about the issue. The fifth principle states that only a small change is necessary, which is why only a small and reasonable goal is essential. So very small, the goals of solution focused in some ways can look more like objectives. The sixth principle dictates that once a change occurs in one part of a person's life, then other changes will ensue in their whole systemic lives. So family therapy means that the therapist must work to witness changes that occur throughout the whole family rather than working with the individual who is part of the system. So you're looking at the whole, and you're also recognizing that changes in one part create changes in others. This is very Bowenian from just a foundational standpoint. The final principle states that effective counseling can be achieved even when the counselor cannot articulate the client's complaint. So basically, you can achieve change without having to focus too much on the client's negative outlook, which other models do. So solution-focused therapy is very present-focused. They're not interested in like the origins of an issue. They're not interested in taking this big historical look of how the issue has evolved. They're not anti-history. There is like context that it may be important. You just don't stay there. You're moving to what have you tried? How has that worked? What tweaks do we need to make? Let's try something different. So you can also see from like a MRI standpoint and the behavioral aspect of MRI that very much carries into solution focused. Okay, so within solution focused, there are different types of clients. There are customers, though these are similar to the complainants, but they're highly cooperative and willing to change disruptive patterns. They're willing to take action and ready to take action. There are visitors who enter therapy without an identified complaint or problem issue. They may initiate counseling at the request of another person and may be non-compliant. They're not really in the market for therapy. And then there's complainants who identify a complaint or problem issue. A common complainant is parents. They're usually less flexible. So it's like, so here we'll go to the trans-theoretical model. You can see these different types of clients, the visitor, the complainant, and the customer. You can see their motivation from low to high. So visitor has a low motivation, complainant it's like moderate to high, still maybe not super insightful or accountable to their contribution. Customer is high. Source of the problem for a visitor, someone else. Complainant, generally, the problem is generally related to something outside. They expect the counselor or another to be a source of the solution. Customers have high accountability. The view of who needs to change. Visitor, complainant, someone else. Customer, more accountable. Building the therapeutic alliance is different with these different types of clients. So with a visitor, you want to identify areas where the client sees the problem and is willing to work on them to make them more of a customer in the process. A complainant, you're honoring the client's view of the situation while identifying specific incidents where the client can make a difference. So, like any of the other approach, well, I would say that solution focused is a high accountability approach where you really want people to take responsibility for what's going on in their lives, because that's where the belief of the change can happen, is that they are their own agent of change. Um, and that they can identify where they're contributing to like their own distress or systemic distress. So with the customer, you want to join with the client by complementing their readiness for change, focus of the interventions, and with the visitor, you're working to build the alliance, understanding their perspective, you're framing outside request for change as the problem. In a complainant, these you're going to use some observation oriented tasks. So for example, identifying exceptions over the week. With a customer, you're the way that the interventions you're using are reframing, identifying what doesn't work. You're doing some action oriented tasks since they're ready to change. And their readiness for action, visitors are not ready generally for making active changes in their life until they believe that there's a problem and is motivated for change. So you could consider them like in the pre-contemplation or maybe contemplation stages of the trans-theoretical model. Clayton is not ready for action until they're open to the idea that their actions can make a difference. So maybe contemplation, perhaps preparation. And then customer, they're ready to take action. So they would be considered in the action stage of the trans-theoretical model. All right, so stages of therapy from left to right, top to bottom. You're co-constructing a problem and a goal. So you want to understand what the problem is. You're not going to spend a bunch of time understanding the history or anything of it. And then you want to know, what's its complementing goal. Then you're going to identify and amplify exceptions, very similar to narrative. You're using assigning tasks. So solution focused is definitely an approach that leans into homework, work in session. But session is primarily used for processing what they did outside of session. So then you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of these tasks. How did it go out when you did the homework? And then based on their feedback, you're going to reevaluate the problems and the goals. That happens every session. Okay, so within assessment, you're going to obtain a brief description of the presenting complaint. Brief. You're not spending a whole session generally looking at that. You want to move directly into asking the client how things would be different if the problem were solved. So you only need a little intake information because you want to hear the client's constructions of their problem firsthand. So you're not going to necessarily take a bunch of time to read the intake. You want to hear it from your clients directly. So you're also looking for exceptions to the problem. You're listening for those just like you would in narrative. You want to focus on perceptions rather than feelings. The purpose or the thought here with solution focus, not leaning so much into feelings, is that feelings are um, they can be kind of messy and maybe difficult to change, whereas perceptions and like that cognition um, can be a little bit more straightforward and easier to like manipulate in some ways. And the thought is that the feelings will change as a consequence of the perceptions changing. So you want to validate your client's position. That's always going to be a piece of any of these postmodern approaches. Then you're assessing for strengths and resources. You can do this in two ways: by directly asking about strengths, hobbies, and areas of life that are going well. So kind of meeting the person using some narrative language here. And then you can also assess for strengths by listening carefully for exceptions to problems and for areas of unnoticed strength. And when you notice those, you highlight them. All right, so in the first session, attention is paid to getting to know one another. You're building rapport by paying compliments and highlighting their strengths. Each solution-focused therapy session is considered the final session, and the goal, like the position of this, is that the client determines when they want to come back. So similar to experiential in that way, you want to ask about exceptions in that first session, perhaps pull out the miracle question using scaling questions, which are very quintessential. Miracle questions, scaling questions are quintessential to solution focus. So if the session goes well, you give them homework to build on the exceptions, and you do more of what is working, or at least have some space to observe for that. Okay, so goals of solution focused. Uh, you want the goals to be meaningful to the client. So they must be personally important to the client, not just a good idea. Personally relevant, meaningful, they resonate with them, they believe in them. Goals should be interactional. So rather than reflect a general feeling like feeling better, the goals should describe how interactions with others will change. So observable, behavioral. Should be situational. So rather than global terms like an improved mood at work, these goals are stated, like improved mood, for example, would be global. The goals are stated in situational terms that they would have an improved mood at work. Small steps. So goals should be short term with identifiable small steps. So if I'm saying like I want to feel better and have an improved mood at work, we want to identify the steps to get there. So what would be like three things that would be like, if the goal is here, how do we make like three literal steps to getting there that build on one another? There's a clear role for the client in the goals. So the goals should identify a clear role for the client rather than for others. So like I said, very accountability based, very client as the agent of change based. They're realistic. Goals need to be realistic for the client currently. Their capacities, their financial reality, their all of you want to assess the client to understand them deeply enough to know that the goals are realistic for where they're at right now. They're not aspirational, that they can be achievable right now. They're legal and ethical, of course. Goals should be legal and adhere to client, counselor, and professional ethics. Okay, so any subsequent sessions beyond the first. So in these subsequent sessions, you're going to ask questions about the time in between sessions in such a way that it highlights progress. So what has changed from the last time I saw you? Okay, how do we build on that? And we'll talk about common responses to this question about like how has the time between sessions been? You want to help the client find out what they are doing or what has happened that has led to improvements so that they will know what to do more often. So solution focused really is an approach that's focused on the therapist not being needed, that the client can do this stuff on their own without professional assistance. You want to help the client work out whether the improvements have caused things to go well enough that further sessions may not be necessary. Then you want to see whether the client feels that what the therapist and clients did in the previous session has been useful and has given the client a sense that things are going to get better. So is what we're doing in session relevant? Is what the homework that we are working on, is that relevant? We're going to be asking them that. Okay. So in alignment with these subsequent sessions, that remember when I said ask questions about the time in between and like what responses they might get? Here are some possible responses. That things are going better. The clients disagree about the progress that they've made. Maybe they're not in alignment with one another. Maybe they see it differently than you do. Things are the same or things are going worse. So what I want to offer you are some ways to respond to these responses. So if a client says things are getting better, how did you make that happen? So again, very accountability focused, very client as the agent of change. How did you manage to, like whatever their goal is, or moving closer to their goal? How did you come up with that fine idea? How is that different for you? What did you tell yourself to help you do it in that way? How do you have what do you have to keep doing so that this will happen more often? So all of these things to just keep the momentum going. Okay. So I disagree with you. I have made progress, but they haven't. So here are some possible responses to that. How come things aren't worse for you? So really looking the way that this question is asked guides the client to look at the positives and that the ways in which things have been going well. What steps have you taken to ensure that things don't get worse? So again, prevention, and you might also assign homework and instruct them to observe each other doing the desired behavior and to take notes. So purposely making them like be very cognizant of looking out for the behaviors that they want. Okay, so response, things are getting worse. So here you want to refrain from being too optimistic because that can feel dismissive. You can also potentially ask more pessimistic questions and meet the client where they are. So how do you manage to go under these circumstances? So it's still like, how are you coping? How are you managing? How come things aren't worse than they are? So you're still looking at like the more positive end of this experience. What can others do for you? How did you manage to get out of bed this morning and make it here? So this is a lot about coping when things aren't going well. How do you manage? How do you cope? What would most help you climb back in the saddle and face these difficulties? So still looking for support, resilience. You can see that there's very much a resilience lens here. And then there's the response of things are the same. So solution focused therapists believe that remaining stable is a strength in and of itself. So please don't see a response like things are the same as a loss. It's definitely considered a win. How do you manage to remain stable? What is needed for you to maintain that rating in the next time to come? On a scale of 10 to 0, how would you rate your current situation? And you're always like telling them what 10 and 0 mean. To like 10 is ideal, 0 is the worst. Who among the most important people in your life is most worried about you? So understanding their support. Okay. So another one of the I would say one of the two things that solution focused therapists are best known for are the miracle question and scaling question. So here is the miracle question in its original form. Suppose that one night while you are asleep, there is a miracle and the problem you brought here is solved. However, because you are asleep, you don't know that the miracle has already happened. When you wake up in the morning, what will be different that will tell you that the miracle has taken place? Then they're going to start saying things and you're asking them, what else? What else would you notice? So the purpose of the miracle question is for them to like be fully engrossed in this vision of what could be. And so it's like I imagine it like if I were to have like virtual reality uh lenses on and I could walk through someone's imagination and they were like my tour guide that I would be like, and what else? What's over here? What is this? So they're just like fully painting the picture of this like fully engrossing experience. And just so y'all know, a miracle question, like diving into it and dissecting it and exploring it, that could be an entire session in and of itself. So the miracle question can be used for assessment, goal setting, and intervention. It's like a jack of all trades with this. It invites clients to envision an unlimited range of possibilities and activates the problem solving mindset. So they're looking at like, when you wake up, usually what people will say, it would be a beautiful day out. Tell me what the sky looks like. What's the temperature? How are you feeling? Um, who else would be with you? Do you eat breakfast in the morning? What would you eat for breakfast? How would you prepare breakfast? Who would join you for breakfast? Then what? Then what? Then what? You like really think about it as engaging all of the senses. Like what would you see? What would you smell? What would you taste? How would things feel mentally, emotionally, physically? Um, and then see, did I say see? See, smell, taste, hear. What would you hear? So you're engaging all of the senses. So there's the miracle question is also a useful way to find out where the client wants to end up and what that will look like in concrete terms. So your miracle question like may not necessarily be possible, but there are pieces of it that very much could be. And in some ways, it can help build the goals. So then you can have build these small concrete steps to it. So it creates a good starting point when one is inquiring about exceptions because someone can ask, when has a small part of the miracle already manifested itself? Also, an important thing to consider when doing the miracle question is to set it up. Like before you deliver this, like suppose that one night, like I've said things like, would you be willing to do something a little bit out of the box with me? Would you be willing to put your imagination caps on? I'm really going to ask you to unburden yourself from limitations. And I'm going to ask you this question like, do you trust me or would you be willing to go into this and then step into that? So the miracle question has some derivatives to it. So there's the crystal ball option. So this is how you would say these. Imagine I had a crystal ball that allowed us to look into the future to a time when the problems you came here for are already resolved. I hold it up to you and you look in. What do you see? So same thing. What are you envisioning? Walk me through, like, let's completely lean into this vision. There's a magic wand question. Imagine we had a magic wand, or imagine that this magic wand I have here actually works if you physically have something and you could wave it and all the problems you came here for are miraculously resolved. What would be different? So same premise, like or same goal in terms of going into the vision. Then the time machine. Imagine I had a time machine that could propel you into the future to the point in time when the problems you came to see me for are totally resolved. Imagine you stepped in. Where do you end up? Who is with you? What's happening? Like these are things that you would could ask them one at a time, but these are options here. How is your life different? How did your problems go away? So if you want, feel free to like partner up with somebody or I don't know, talk to a person you live with, you're close with. But I encourage you to just try doing the miracle question. So one possible response to this is, oh, I don't believe in miracles. So let's say you have somebody who says that. Here are some options. Suppose that no miracle occurs, but when you wake up tomorrow morning, the problems you've described have indeed disappeared. What would be different in your life? There's no need to believe in miracles, but suppose you did believe in them. That's another like tactic for solution focused is like, suppose that you knew what was going on. Suppose you had a theory. Like if people say, I don't know, for example, what would the miracle look like? I understand you have both feet firmly on the ground. What then would your ideal day look like? So just, trying to meet them where they are without saying like, no, you must engage in this exercise with me. Okay. So the other kind of cornerstone of solution focused is scaling questions. So the purpose of scaling questions is to assess strengths and solutions. Well, these are all possible purposes for them. So scaling questions, you can do so many things with them. You can assess strengths and solutions, you can set goals, you can design homework tasks, you can measure progress with them, you can manage crises with safety plans. So here are some examples. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is where you achieve your goal completely and 1 is the furthest away you have ever been, where would you place yourself now? So here you can see like measuring of progress. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the worst things have been and 10 is the best, where would you place yourself today? So another kind of progress based scaling question. So here are some other purposes for scaling questions or options for you. Assessing what works. So if 0 is where you were when you decided to seek help, and 10 is where you would be if the problem you came here for was resolved, where are you today? So if it's above a 0, what are you doing or what is happening that tells us you are at a 3 and not a 0? So I want to really point out like the difference in this is So let's say that someone says, I'm at a 2. So it'd be easy to ask, like, well, how do we get to a 4? And what you're unintentionally encouraging there is a problem focused narrative of like, well, I've got this that's not going well. I've got this person I'm arguing with. I have this thing that's looming. So you want to frame them the the other way, or you have the option of framing them the other way of like, okay, I'm at a 2. Okay, tell me what is keeping you from being at a 1. So then they'll be looking at like, what is going well? How am I managing well? Where is my resilience? So just keeping that in mind when you ask scaling questions, and then how you follow up. Then how do you get from a 0? How did you get from a 0 to here? So again, like progress oriented, resilience oriented, action oriented. So another option is to design week to week interventions and tasks. So on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being your desired goal, where are you this week? So let's say the client responds with 3. If you are at a 3 this week, what things would you need to be different in your life for you to come and say you are at a 4? So here is like one step higher. So, or a half step higher if the client tends toward pessimism. So you're looking, this is still the way that this question is formulated is still having them look at resources, possibilities. So if I were to say, what keeps you from being a 4? That's a different question than like, what do you need to get to a 4? Is then they're in this like problem solving, like maybe solution building space. So it generally takes an entire session to fully flesh out one concrete step that is realistic and meaningful and something that the client is motivated to try. So don't worry about like taking too much time on these. And then another option here is to measure progress. So last week you said you were at a 3. Where would you say you are this week and why? So if things got better, what did you do that helped you move up to the scale? If things stayed the same or got worse, what happened that kept things the same or made them worse? And then you can build some like possibilities from there. Okay, so once you ask a scaling question, there are things that like that's not the last thing. You don't just get a number and go, okay. So you want to follow up with some additional questions. So what makes you think you got that far? What things have you done already that got you to this point? What do you think will move you one step further? What would be the first sign that you had moved 1 point further? Who would be the first person who would notice? How would you know you were at this goal? How would you be doing differently? How would your days be different? What changes would other people notice in you? So really trying to get this like comprehensive view based on a number that they give you. Okay, so homework is a big piece of solution focused. Some people don't like the term homework, so I like to frame it as an experiment. So I borrow that from solution focused. It can be framed as an experiment until the next time you see them or until some determined time frame. The reason that I like experiments is sometimes like change is hard. Humans are generally like resistant to change. We like homeostasis, we like predictability, we like to stay in the same even when it's like not good for us. So experiments allow it to be time limited. So I don't have to like marry this solution or this behavior change. I don't have to commit to it for life. Um, I can just try it, and I think it helps people be more open to trying when they feel like they can go back on that, or when they don't have to commit to that change forever. So when you're doing homework, so when you have this homework conversation, this experiment conversation, I encourage you to leave at least 5 minutes to talk about it, because you want to address like, to me, homework is best co-created. So one of the things that I usually say to my clients is there anything we talked about today that sparks an idea for something to work on over the next week or until I see you next? So I always let them answer first. And then if they're like, I'm not sure, I always have an idea. So I'll say, well, you had mentioned this thing in session today. I'm wondering if maybe we can have a experiment focused in this on this topic. And then we'll co-create it and I'll like check comprehension. So what do you understand you will be doing until I see you next? So I want to check comprehension, make sure that we're all on the same page moving forward. Then I always ask, can you think of any reasons why you wouldn't be able to complete this experiment? So I'm talking about barriers, what, like if they're transportation, time, commitments, buy-in, like I want to understand all of it so that we can create, so we can like remove as many barriers as possible. So, like I said, solution focused therapists frequently end sessions with homework assignments. So these assignments can be created by the client. You could, for an example of this is assigning themselves to do more of what is working. Homework in and of itself is not necessary for change. So if they don't complete the assignment, you don't have to address it. Um, I think it's important to an important way of getting feedback. So it's you don't have to, but I like doing it. Um, Not completing an assignment may mean that something realistic got in the way of completing it. The client didn't find the assignment useful. The assignment was not relevant. Um, I want to know those things, and I want to create a space where we can talk about that. So, though it's you have the option of not talking about it, I encourage you to talk about it. Okay, so another aspect of solution focused is exception questions. So these explore times when the complaint does not occur or occurs less than other times. It allows you to build on past successes. So you can ask things like, when does your partner listen to you? Tell me about the days when you wake up fuller of life. When are the times you manage to get everything done at work? Then you want to amplify the exception. So, how do you explain to yourself why these times are different? How do you achieve that? What do you do differently then? Who else is involved that notices the difference? What do they say or do? What would you have to do or see for this to happen more or less off or for this to happen more often? What else? So you're really diving in when you find an exception, you want to dive into that and dissect it. So because the belief is that this is replicable. Let's replicate what is successful. And it shows that the client already has the capacity to do something that is closer to their goal or that they want. Okay, coping questions. These are meant to generate hope, agency, and motivation, especially when clients are feeling overwhelmed. So, coping questions are used when the client is not reporting progress, describing an acute crisis, or otherwise feeling hopeless. So, coping questions direct clients to identify how they have been coping through a current or past difficult situation. So this sounds hard. How have you managed to cope with this to the degree that you have? So again, resilience, hope, agency. How have you managed to prevent this situation from getting worse? So still, it's like validating that they're in a tough spot while also having this overarching theme of resilience. Compliments are a big piece of solution focused. They provide the therapist an opportunity to highlight the client's progress, strengths, and resources. It allows you to reflect to clients what they have already done to begin to solve the problem. And it assists in establishing the therapeutic relationship. So some compliments are, wow, how did you do that? That's impressive. You managed to stay stable this week. Wow, you moved from a 4 to a 5 this week. That's wonderful. So just bringing the enthusiasm, bringing the light energy to session. Okay, paraphrasing. I like this about solution focus because it's a little unique from just like a general paraphrase or like the paraphrase micro skill that you've learned. So you're using the client statement to turn impossibilities to possibilities. So you want to talk about problems in the past tense and talk about possibilities in the future or present tense. So here are some like reframed paraphrases. So let's say a person says, I can never ask a girl out. How you might paraphrase that is, so far you have not managed to ask a girl out. So it's leaving the possibility that in the future like asking a girl out, is possible. I can't lose weight. You haven't managed to lose weight yet. If I get out of my depression, I can resume my hobby. When you come out of your depression, you will be able to resume your hobby. So you can these like slight language changes to help with the reframe. All right, so solution focused also has a way of addressing clients who say, I don't know. So when this happens, therapists need to practice patience, silence, and encouragement to help clients identify many steps toward their goal, which is a critical part of the process. So make sure you're sticking with open-ended questions, avoid yes or no or closed-ended questions. So some prompts you could use for I don't know clients, take a guess. It is a difficult question. Suppose you did know. One I like to say is like take your time. I know that's a big question. What would be better in your life if you did know? That's a difficult question, isn't it? And then wait for them. Then another option is just simply wait and sit in silence until they come up with something. My belief is that when adults say, I don't know, like I don't think that's true. They know something. When like teenagers or kids say it, like I'm more apt to like let it go. When adults say it, I don't tend to let it go. Okay, so in regard to some strengths of solution focused, it's brief. People love brief approaches. Research shows that a client needs an average of 5 sessions to achieve their treatment goals. The client is the expert, therefore, the client's perspective is what determines the focal points of therapy. So, solution focused therapy, therefore, does not pay much attention to culture because it's flexible and it can adapt to any client. It does not make assumptions about people and it honors each client's story and background. A 2009 study argued that this approach can fit with various cultural perspectives if the therapists follow the client's lead. So, just some examples of strengths here and some weaknesses or growth edges. Some people want to talk about their problems in their lives. So, that's what they're motivated to come to therapy about is to have someone listen. This approach doesn't really allow that. Clients may want to view the therapist as an expert. So some may doubt the helpfulness of a therapist who takes a not knowing position. Some may say it's too simplistic, and emphasis on solution focused talk can seem short sighted or potentially even manipulative. There's an insistence of solution focused talk that may not allow for empathy and understanding. I think that's if it's misused, to be very honest with you. Okay, so y'all remember you have access to this in the Google Drive. So all of my PowerPoints that you're like the PowerPoint that you're watching right now on YouTube, the slide deck is available in Google Drive. So feel free to follow or like click on this link and watch Insoo Kim Berg with a couple. And then just some references if you're interested. And that is all I have for you for these 2 weeks.